Hi Adam, hope you're well and thank you for your video update. So let me get straight over my notes. So nutrition wise, obviously you talked about doing some guesstimating. I think that's not a problem at this point of time. When it is dried fruit and nuts, what I will say is these are things that are quite easy to underestimate. And if you underestimate them by even small amounts, that adds up quickly. So just be careful with it. If you're estimating something like popcorn, it's much lighter. So if you underestimate that, like even if you're, if you underestimate 10 grams on dried fruit or nuts, there's a significant amount of calories in 10 grams. Whereas for popcorn, because it's so light, or cereal, because it's so light, if you underestimate by 10 grams or overestimate whatever it might be, it's a much smaller, they're much less calorie dense. So more calorie dense foods, it's more important to be more precise generally. So I just wanted to point that out. Interesting to hear that you're cutting dairy out of your diet. My advice would be to not necessarily cut it out, but taper it at least and see if that has any impact and helps with things. I know I've seen some of your notes where you had poor digestion and it was where you had a lot of dairy. So well may be the dairy, but I would suggest more so tapering it rather than getting it completely, because quite often it's a dose rather than a kind of just the fact it's dairy. Quite often it's a dose of the amount, and it might be nice for you to have some dairy. And yes, whey protein has dairy in it. It has lactose. It's normally the lactose that's the problem, but whey protein concentrate, it hasn't got as much as many of the other forms that you're having. Isolate would have the least. But like I say, you'll probably not find that you're having a problem from a small amount. It's probably just when you have large amounts that it causes an issue. So in terms of training, obviously talked about RAR and that sort of thing. And what I'd say is what you want to be doing, and however which way you do this is how you want to do it, is for the number of sets, you want to pick a weight that lands you pretty much within the rep range for every single set and stick for that reps in reserve. So if you're picking a weight and you're hitting the reps in reserve and you're at the low end of that repetition range, then you might struggle for the next sets to stay within the repetition range. You might drop a bit below. If it's 1 to 2 repetitions below, I'm not too worried about it. If it's more than that, then I start to kind of get a bit like, right, we'll probably need to reduce load. So it might be pertinent to pick a load that you can land at the upper end of the rep range for your first set with the reps in reserve, and then you might drop off a few reps as fatigue kicks in across sets. Now, for some exercises, that makes complete sense, such as, I think, squats, Romanian deadlifts, where your reps would drop off. Whereas on other exercises, maybe like a lateral raise, your actual ability to repeat performance is probably quite high. It's not a compound movement. The lats, the delts recover pretty quickly. So I could see that you could repeat performance. However, if that does happen on a squat where you can hit 6, 6, 6, and your first set to your last set were all 2 reps in reserve, then that's fair enough, and that's good knowledge. And it's just making sure that is the case, and it's not just you having that kind of fixation of I need to hit the same repetitions or anything like that. So that's really what I want to say, and I don't want to make too many manipulations to your volume before I know we've got that kind of reps in reserve correct, just so that we get the most out of your training and aren't kind of pushing things in appropriately. And at the moment, like you said, you're still kind of doing your best to gauge your reps in reserve for things like your pressing movements. Sometimes you're taking it a little bit too far, and it's just kind of having that awareness of that as well. Making sure to rest enough also between sets. That quite often can be a problem with pressing and upper body movements. You don't quite rest as much as what you do with a squat and things, but sometimes the muscles do require that extra bit of rest. And in general, we wouldn't want, in some cases this week, you've had some very large increments in load on the bar, and generally we want small incremental increases in load, and we don't want big jumps. And I know you did a big jump because of what I talked about with reps in reserve, but just so you know, in knowledge for future, it will be small incremental increases in load is what we're more so looking for. You don't especially want to increase load for the sake of volume. That would be a no-no. So for example, if you added 10 kgs and you're doing 3x5 and then you did 3x2, you wouldn't want to do that in a hypertrophy program. That's more like a strength training program, because you're increasing intensity for the sake of volume, whereas you actually want to more so increase volume and keep or slightly increase intensity for the most part. So awesome on the RDLs, and the PR and the rep drop off did look expected and good. On the pull-ups, if you're gaining body weight, you don't need to add additional load to the pull-up. Like I said, if you can land within the rep range with the load, that's with the reps in reserve, that's what you want. So if you can add a little bit of load as well, then that's fair enough. But you don't need to. And I would track it as your body weight plus whatever you add to yourself. Because yeah, in a massing phase, that makes complete sense. Whereas in a cutting phase, obviously you're losing weight, so you actually want to be adding load to the bar as well. Otherwise, yeah, you'll just end up using less and less load. In terms of reporting overall fatigue, that's basically like, as a whole, how are you feeling? How, as a whole, do you feel like you could go for another week and progress on the week just gone? What are your symptoms at the moment? Are you feeling anything of overreaching in terms of like, how's your sleep? How's your hunger levels? How's your recovery between sessions? And yeah, how's your psychology? Do you feel motivated to train still? It's basically me gauging, do we think a deload is coming up and we need to take that? Or do we think we're still good to keep training? And generally I ask that the week before deload. It might have had it a week earlier in your program. No, so yeah, week 4, report overall fatigue. So that's what I want you to have to think about is, can we go for that 5th week of training? And that's something that obviously we need to decide pretty soon, because this time next week, you'll have already done 1 session of your deload. So do we feel like a 5th week would be appropriate? Or do you feel like you're getting to that point of where a deload would be something that would be helpful right now, and you kind of want to wipe that slate clean? And then in that deload week, you get that mesocycle feedback done, get your photos and measurements done as well. So yeah, you can feedback to me that in an email. And then I just had a note to check your email to me. So I'm just going to check that as well, because I know you wrote a few bits in there. Let me find that, sorry. So obviously really unfortunate to hear about your lower back and squatting and all of kind of the discomfort, and then that pain kicked in afterwards, which is really not a good thing. And that might be an indication that we need that deload. And you've reported about your lower back before, and I agree with you doing the seated hamstring curls instead. That makes good sense to me. Kind of equating volume there and doing more sets of it because it's less overloading. That makes good sense to me. I'm not a physiotherapist, so I can't give you great advice in this area. Obviously, seeing your form videos and everything is very, very helpful, and we can identify if there's anything that's clearly kind of necessarily wrong in that. But I'd like to hear what a physio has to say about this, what they think it could be, or yeah, what's happening there. That would be my first port of call, would be to see a physiotherapist. I don't want you to use a belt as a band-aid and something that's just covering the pain. I do think a belt is very good, and I think it does secure against lower back injuries when used properly, and it is something I would suggest you use and were to get, especially at your training development, but I don't want you to use it as a band-aid. So my first suggestion would be to see a physio. Second suggestion would, after seeing a physio, see what they think to a belt as well, and I think a belt would probably be a good idea for you to have. And then, yeah, go from there, because basically it's just giving your spine more stability. So I do think that would be a good idea. Cool. So then you asked me about your diet. So meal 1, you had the protein shake. That pretty much got that one up. Nice. Deli chicken, Greek yogurt. Meal 4 then has nothing. And then final, cool, Halo Top and Grenade protein shake. So obviously you had the Halo Top again. So just bear that in mind when you're thinking about the dairy, because I do think Halo Top, having a whole tub, I think can cause issues sometimes for people. And I'm assuming these meals are at fairly frequent intervals, like maybe 3 hours or so. So yeah, 4 eggs, nice. You've got a couple of eggs, beans there, turkey, cool. White fish, nice. Whey, cool. Yeah, basically you're just inserting, for the most part, every meal with a high quality protein source. Yeah, looks much better. What's your opinion on protein found in peas and other veg? I count that as basically half. So I like to see, if you're having a meal, I'd like to see at least one high quality protein source within each meal to make sure you've got that full amino acid profile. Peas don't have that. So I tend to count like the protein in that as half. So just don't make peas like a foundation of where you're getting your protein from, but we tend to cover that because I've given you a higher protein intake than is necessary, like 1 gram per pound. We're above that. So that is everything I've got for you this week, Adam. I look forward to hearing back from you, and I hope your back starts feeling better soon.